Hi guys, this is Mattias. And in this video I'd like to talk about a few things that I've seen a number of people bringing up before me, and that is, well, first and foremost, the inconsistency of some of the weapons. And as much as the most discussed weapon is of course the shotgun, it is not only about the shotgun. But as a lot of people have noticed, H1Z1 is a game that is rather random. Something that, when things don't go your way, will cause a lot of frustration because you feel that it wasn't really your own fault. Like, it's one thing if your aim is off and if you feel that you just missed the target, but if you have your aim on target and the bullets just don't connect, a lot of people get really irritated over this, and for good reasons. Now, if H1Z1 is the first and only shooter that you've ever played by Daybreak Game Company, former SOE, then I'm sure it's easy to believe that all of this is just bugs and flaws in the game, and a lot of that is the cause of the game being in early access. But for the ones of you that the 2 years prior to the release of H1Z1 played the game Planetside 2, something that I did, you might look at this from a different perspective. In the H1Z1 community, I've seen a lot of people pointing out that they would like the game to be more based on skill. And this word, skill, is a very infected word in the eyes of the developers of Planetside 2 and H1Z1. Now, the main reason for this is actually quite easy to understand. Neither in Planetside 2 or in H1Z1 are people put into different leagues that are based on their skill and experience level. Instead, we are put on the servers randomly based on other things, which in theory means that some of the most experienced players can very well have an engagement with a player that has less than 5 minutes in the game. And because of this, high-skilled players can in many cases be considered a big problem. I know for a fact that this was the case in Planetside 2. Unfortunately, in Planetside 2 this was rather hard to discuss because in Planetside 2 you can more specifically decide what playstyle you want to choose, and instead of learning a really difficult playstyle, you can choose an easier one, stick to that one, and basically do just as good. So now a very deciding factor to how the game turns out when it comes to balancing this with patches and updates is of course the community. And here I've seen a massive difference between the two games. Now, the hostility and negativity towards high-skilled players that we saw in Planetside 2 barely seems to exist at all in H1Z1. On the other hand, I think that the developers had learned how to make the game a lot more new player-friendly in H1Z1 from the very beginning, something that in Planetside 2 they had to achieve later on by nerfing skill-based weapons and by adding and buffing weapons that didn't require the same kind of player skill. Another thing about Planetside 2 that was actually to me rather unique for that game was that this was very hard to discuss. Pointing out that one playstyle was harder than another playstyle and required more training and more skill was something that normally turned into a very hostile and toxic discussion. And at least in the beginning of these discussions when I participated, I got completely caught off guard by this. Yeah, I really wanted to kill him with the R380, by the way, there. The things I do to make videos, you have no idea. So now, two of the things that affects our opinions one way or another are our own experiences with the game and by watching other people play it. And by watching other people, we are talking about content creators such as YouTubers and Twitch streamers. And here, again, the difference between Planetside 2 and H1Z1 is massive. When it comes to Planetside 2, Twitch didn't really hit that big. There were people streaming it, but none that became really that popular, at least not by comparison to H1Z1. Instead, it was more about YouTube. And the majority of the YouTubers that were covering Planetside 2 were kind of like spokesmen for the mediocre part of the community. And while higher skilled players and more skill-based playstyles and weapons were normally met with a lot of negativity, weapons and playstyles that were basically designed to be easier to use were normally described as more advanced than they actually were. Now, in the Planetside 2 community, the voices and the opinions for mediocrity took foothold and ruled. And where does he think he's going? So now when they started working on H1Z1, they had all of those experiences with them, and of course they wanted to make sure that skill was not too much of a deciding factor because of the problems that had caused in Planetside 2. Now, one way of making sure that the high-skilled players didn't always get an advantage from their skill and experience was to make the weapons random. The most obvious example here is the bullet spread of the shotgun that for a long time were just that, random. Now, when the pellet spread of the shotgun is decided basically just by chance, then it matters less whether or not you put your aim on the target or whether or not you actually miss a little bit, and the randomness just from time to time happens to work for you. Now what this does is that it lowers the difference between high-skilled players and low-skilled players. Whereas you can just look at it this way. If you put your aim perfectly on target, the pellets might hit the target, but they might also spread in a direction away from the target. Now on the other hand, if your aim is a little bit off target, then, of course you might miss, but from time to time, the bullet spread might actually compensate for the lack of aim, and you might hit the target randomly anyway. Now thankfully this was relatively quickly fixed, mainly because of the community, but also because I think that the community got their voices heard a lot from content creators in this regard. Sloppy, 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 sloppy bad. Now in the H1Z1 community, people seem to look at this very differently, and it is a lot easier to discuss it in this game rather than Planetside. And one of the main reasons for that, I'm sure there are many reasons, but one of the main reasons is that in H1Z1, a lot of what is considered top players are actually streamers. And as much as the difference between skill among players in both games are probably as big, the representation among high-skilled players is a lot higher and a lot bigger in H1Z1. And this changes a lot of things. Not only does it change the attitude among a lot of players in the community, but the way that the developers look at this and what decisions they make seems to be changing also. Because in the former game, high-skilled players and high-skilled playstyles were considered a reason why people left the game. In H1Z1, where Battle Royale became very popular for a lot of different reasons, but one of the things that made it popular was that it is a very streamer-friendly game. And streamers and YouTubers, myself included, are considered very important for the game developers, not only in terms of bringing people to start playing the game in the first place, but in a game that has the business model of Planetside 2 and H1Z1. When a popular streamer is browsing through all his cooler looking skins, those skins that you also can buy for a few dollars, that is actually pure commercial. And then, all of a sudden, high-skilled players might not be considered the same kind of problem anymore. At the same time, though, when there are issues with the weapons and, just the game in general, this is going to be more obvious when it is played by a high-skilled player. This is one of the reasons why so many games that has tried to make it into esports, for example, has failed. Because, in esports, you're going to have the top players playing, and if there is a problem with the game, you're going to see it then. On the H1Z1 Reddit, you've seen a lot of posts about weapons and, game-breaking issues, but the game just not functioning properly. And the thing about it is that most of these posts, when I read it, is that, it's just the same thing that we had in Planetside. But in the H1Z1 community, people notice it a lot more. And I think a main reason for that is because of who people get inspired from, what players people are watching when they're watching streams and VODs. And the fact that more skilled and more experienced players will notice problems with weapons and the game in general to a higher degree than a more mediocre player will do. Also, for the ones of you who are a little bit unfamiliar with these kinds of discussions, the most notorious and the biggest topic that has ever been brought up in these kinds of discussions that I'm talking about right now is probably the issues with performance. Now, luckily, a man named Total Biscuit has been probably the strongest and biggest voice in any kind of gaming community when it comes to highlighting this problem. And when it comes to the importance of content creators, Total Biscuit actually did play quite a big role in the early parts of promoting Planetside 2 together with Tobuscus or Toby Turner and Sean Anners. Now, these three YouTube profiles that I mentioned were hired by SOE, as they were called back then, for the sole purpose of promoting Planetside 2. Now, having Total Biscuit as one of them makes perfect sense. He knows a lot about games in general, esports, and he knows a lot about the things that are important for gamers that are interested in a game such as Planetside 2. So now, with the other two YouTubers that I mentioned, both of them are actually bigger than Total Biscuit, but as far as I know, they seem to be focusing more on children's shows rather than content that is related to games like Planetside 2. So I think the sole purpose of them being hired were because they were big. After that, the guy that took over the role as the frontman on YouTube for Planetside 2 was Level Cap. And out of these four big YouTubers that I mentioned, Level Cap was the only one that actually did play the game. So yes, I'm sure you understand, the importance of content creators for gaming companies such as Daybreak Game Company cannot be underestimated. Now, on the other hand, though, I also want to point something out, and that is that I don't believe that our opinions, us content creators' opinions, are more important than the rest of the players in the community. Now, on one hand, we can represent a player group, and we can of course also highlight and make videos about things that we think is a problem. But what this does is that it also gives you guys who are part of the community a chance to support a certain point of view, add to it if you feel like there was something missing, or you can argue against it if you feel like you disagree with it. So the way I see it, the impact that a content creator has on the game, its development, and any possible changes is totally dependent on the player base in the community and the players playing the game, which of course in the case of H1Z1 are you guys. So yeah, that's going to be all for this video. My name is Mattias, and I want to thank you all for watching.